On Zoom? Okay, I'm going to sit right here while we get started. Hi there. I'm Lisa Nierenberg, Executive Director here at CAE, and I'm so excited you guys joined us tonight on this crazy weather. We do live in Evergreen, so I appreciate all of you guys weathering the storm literally to come out here tonight, because we think it's such an important issue to talk about, and we have such great speakers lined up. So thank you for coming. So I want to do a couple of things before we get started. The Metro Mountain Realtors Association, did I say it? Something, yes, she's coming up. We're very gracious to be our presenting sponsor because diversity is so important to them. So Carmen Elam is going to come on up and she's going to talk about why diversity is so important to them. And I'm going to introduce you. Come on.
Thank you, Lisa. Good evening, everybody. Oh, am I going to sit here? Okay. Okay, you got it. So, hi, everybody. I'm Carmen Elam. I'm with Coldwell Banker. I'm actually a realtor here in town with Coldwell Banker, but I am a realtor member of the Mountain Metro Association of Realtors. And just a kind of a point of clarification, that is an organization. We are all realtor members as well as affiliate members. So like I've got some colleagues from Berkshire Hathaway, but we all belong to Mountain Metro Association of Realtors. And I'm going to put my glasses on so I can read my notes. So we're just so pleased to be a sponsor here this year for 2022, and just really appreciate that opportunity to support and partner with the center here. Just a little bit about MAMAR. As I mentioned, we're realtors and affiliate members, so affiliate members being like inspectors, title companies, things of that nature. So we provide education and support to our realtor members. Very important part of our of what we do is education. We have a certified mountain area specialist designation that was born right here in Evergreen, and it's specific classes and certain minimal requirements for mountain transactions that our realtors have to do. So a very important thing that we have here. MAMAR is involved in several community outreach projects, including Habitat for Humanity Build Days, food and clothing drives, our annual Goldilocks at the Little Bear. It benefits our local public libraries. So it's a really neat event if you ever get a chance to go. So this year, we've created a new committee focused on diversity, equity, and inclusion. And so we just saw a great need for that. Only, I think, is it just 2 other boards in the whole state that have a DEI committee. So we wanted to definitely, be trailblazers on that front. And so we just thought this made sense to partner with you guys and be part of this series. And I'm just really looking forward to this partnership this upcoming year. So if you guys have any questions about MAMAR or anything that what we do, please don't hesitate to reach out and let us know. You got it.
I also wanted to thank John and Pandora Erlandson. Unfortunately, they couldn't be here tonight. They're both under the weather. But John is on our board, and they are such strong supporters of us, so thank you for all you guys do here. So the other thing I wanted to thank is my wonderful team, because without them, we would not be here. I have the most amazing team. Thank you, Sarah Miller, who is my co-pilot and Senior Director of Exhibitions and Education. And we have Amanda Ingalls, who is our Director of Marketing and Sponsorships, and she is working as your techie tonight. So when you have questions later, just push your raise the hand button, and Amanda will make sure that you are heard. And we also have Tom Maxey. Thank you, Tom. He is our bookkeeper and office manager and keeps us all in line here. So this is why the whole thing came to fruition. I remember, do you remember, Julia, when they had the Black Lives Matters peaceful parade outside, and we all got together with you and we did the hope, and we had actually met you, I had actually met you at the wine event with Michelle, and we started conversations with Julia back then, and you were telling us how important this was to you, and so Sarah and I started talking, and we were like, how can we be better at diversity, equity, and inclusion? And to use Alisha's words, we're all in this journey, and we are all learning together. So we first went to the board and said we want to put together a strategy. And so Bryant, Robert, and Sarah got together, and they started putting together a strategy. And as we were kind of working this, we actually got some feedback from SCFD, full disclosure. And they said, hey, you guys aren't doing enough. And we said, you're right. And so it was our aha moment to say, we need to be better. So we got together and we said, we want this to be a community conversation. We don't just want this to be about the arts and CAE. We want this to be a more inclusive community. And I guarantee you, everybody you ask will say, well, how do you do that? We're an all-white community. They think it's just about race. And it goes so much further than that. That's where the conversation starts, and it does not end. And there's so much for us all to learn, and that's why I'm so excited to have this panel with us tonight. I'm going to introduce everyone, and they'll tell you a little bit, once I bring it over to Alisha, they'll tell you a little bit more about themselves, but I'm just going to do a quick introduction now. I'm going to start with Alisha, because she is our moderator. And Alisha is Director of Equity and Employment of the Denver Art Museum. And she's also 8 months pregnant. And so I'm so grateful that she is here. She was actually recommended to me from somebody who is on the dam board and somebody who lives here in Evergreen. So she is very beloved over there at the dam. And then it was interesting because Sarah had a meeting the other day, and the person said, I am coming to this on Zoom because I love Alisha, and I think this position that they created at the dam was so important. So, Alisha, you've got many fans out there, but one that was just talking to Sarah the other day. So, Alisha will be moderating this. Next on Zoom is an old friend and old colleague of mine, Adeeb Kahn. And Adeeb is the Vice President of Social Responsibility for Delta Dental, and he's also the Executive Director of their foundation. And I have known him for a long time, and he's very wise, so he will add a lot to this conversation. Next to me, everybody knows Rabbi Jamie. If you live in this community, you know Rabbi Jamie. He's kind of a celebrity in town, so maybe that's all I need to say. And then I have Julia. Julia, come on over. You need to see these people, not me. So we have Julia Fliss, and if you have kids, I am sure that they have gone through Julia's class. She is a beloved, did you want to say something? Fliss, I should have asked pronunciation before I started announcing people. Okay, Fliss. I'm going to practice that. Okay, so Julia is a wonderful teacher in town. She was actually my daughter's 6th grade teacher. And whether you remember this or not, you actually nominated her for the Kindness Award, and she holds that dear to her. So next up, we have Jesse King. And here's what I want to say about Jesse. I just met Jesse, but I feel like I need to go to meditation classes with him or something. He is the calmest. You talk to this man and he is just He's so zen, and he everything he says, he thinks about before it comes out of his mouth, which I probably need to take lessons for. Because yes, he's very thoughtful about what he says. So I'm sure you're going to learn a lot from Jesse as well. And now I'm going to turn it over to Alisha and get this panel started.
Thank you, Lisa.
Oops.
Can you hear me? Yes. Awesome. Thank you, Lisa, for the kind introductions. Again, my name is Alisha Andrews. I will be moderating tonight, and I want to give a few moments for each of the panelists to just take some time and introduce themselves and their roles and their connection to the Evergreen community and CAE. Let's start in the room with Jesse.
Hi, my name is Jesse King. I have no connection to the Arts Center for the Arts until now, so it's an honor to be a part of it. I've been an Evergreen resident for 31 years. After working up and living in Leadville, we were driving to Denver and my wife said, "Pull over here, this is close enough to the city." So. Oh, and two amazing realtors, Evie and Alice, helped us find our home. I don't know their company or their name. Sorry.
No worries. Awesome. Hi.
Thanks, Jesse.
You got it. Yeah. Hi, I'm Julia. I am a 6th grade teacher at Evergreen Middle School. I've been in Evergreen for I think maybe 17 years. I'm connected to the Art Center because I am super passionate about art. I love the community draw here specifically. We've co-created projects together. We've launched activism in youth together. And my partner, Michelle, is also an artist who curates and shows here as well. So that's my connection to Evergreen.
And I'm Jamie Arnold. Pleasure to be with you tonight. I came to Evergreen in 2005 to serve as the first full-time rabbi at Congregational Beth Evergreen, which has been here since 1972. And I haven't had formal programmatic connections to the Arts Center prior to this, but certainly supportive of the project and the investment in the community and this in particular initiative. My brother's uncle, our brother's wife's uncle, used to be the pastor in this space. So we have ministerial connections as well in the space, but glad to be here.
Thank you. Adeeb?
Sure. Hi, everybody. My name is Adeeb Kahn, and I serve as the Executive Director for the Delta Dental Colorado Foundation, as well as Vice President for Corporate Responsibility. I have a connection to the Evergreen Arts Center through Lisa, who I worked with at Mile High United Way. Also, two of my colleagues are here today in the audience, Greg and Brad, who are part of our senior leadership team at Delta Dental. They are both Evergreen residents. And when I sent them this information, we're happy to come and attend. So happy to be here, happy to chat.
Thank you so much. I want to start the conversation off by just creating some definitions so that we're all on the same page and we all know what we're talking about. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to define diversity, equity, and inclusion. Then we're going to have 2 sessions of questions for the panel. And then we're going to do audience Q&A at the last bit. So again, if you have questions, you can either directly message and Amanda, and she'll be able to ask the question on your behalf, or you can raise your hand within the audience and ask your question. So first, the most important thing when we're doing any of this work is to make sure that we're all on the same page and we all understand things the same way. So I'm going to define diversity, equity, inclusion. Diversity is honoring the differences between people. That could be gender, that could be race, that could be age, It's a broad span of different identities that people can possess. Inclusion is having thoughtful and intentional participation between groups, making sure that people are able to voice them or to have a voice and to be able to actually be heard when they're voicing their opinion. And then equity is really creating systems that are that have the same outputs for everybody, regardless of what the input is, regardless of any identity that they have. So it's giving people what they need and not giving everybody the same thing. So let's get started with some questions so that we can stay on time here and honor everyone else's time. I want to start with the panelists ask, how did you get into the work of DE and I? And whoever wants to start first.
Love to go first. I'll go first. That's what you have to do in 6th grade to get your kids talking. So let's see, how did I get into this work? I think I've always been an activist. My mom was a 60s flower child in Boulder, and it's in our lifeblood. We do that. My way in, my door in, is actually through Spanish as a language. I'm fluent in Spanish and have worked extensively with the Spanish-speaking community in Denver, also at Iowa, where I went to school. Have done some community outreach work in Mexico and Spain, and women's studies. I worked at a women's shelter and did a lot of counseling advocacy work that combined both of those. So my door into this work is from the inside out. It's just part of me, and it's part of me because of how I choose to see the world and how I choose to believe in our collective story as humans to reach out and make each other better, to share a vision of, hey, we are all co-creating this experience. Let's hold each other's hands. Let's lift each other up. Let's create a path for liberation for all of us.
Thanks, Julia. Adeeb, would you like to go next?
Sure. Yeah, happy to. I think this work, I think for all of us in some form or another, inclusion and diversity work starts at childhood. And for me, it was no different. My parents immigrated to the United States from Northwest Pakistan, and we settled in rural Wyoming. And so I grew up in this, very small town, very isolated community with parents who were essentially from halfway around the world, who had a very different cultural background, very different kind of understanding of norms, and in many ways were isolated in that community. And so part of my, initial experiences was just knowing I was different, knowing I was an outsider, knowing our family was outsiders, and growing up in this environment and kind of just seeing things for the way they were. So that was a big part of just my upbringing. 9/11 happened when I was 18. So, at a big turning point, I think, for our country, a big turning point, I think, for a lot of Muslims in America in terms of just the experience. So that was my freshman year of college. So just, a very big pivotal turning point in terms of the viewpoint of how people perceive Muslims and Islam in America. And so I've always been interested in kind of, situations of oppression or discrimination. When I was in college, I ended up getting a major in journalism communications, but all my electives tended to be something that had to do with the topics. I took courses on the Holocaust. I took courses on the African diaspora. I took 2 different courses on feminism, just to really help me understand so many different perspectives and viewpoints that I had never really been exposed to. And then as I became a professional, I moved to Denver to start my career. I started at the American Red Cross. We just started, when I joined there a while back, about 15 years ago, some work on diversity. And at the time, the Denver Foundation had just started its multicultural and diversity program that they had awarded to nonprofits, and the Red Cross was a recipient. And they asked me about a month after I joined the organization to be somebody who would help lead that work. And so I started in that coursework really started to learn people in the Denver community, really started to understand what the Denver Foundation was really trying to bring about, which I think was remarkable considering that was 15 years ago, some of that work they were doing. And I've just continued with it throughout my career. I've spent about 10 years in the nonprofit sector, specifically working at the American Red Cross and United Way. A lot of that work relates in inclusion, equity, and diversity. When I moved then to working as the director of corporate responsibility at TIAA, which is a Fortune 100 company, which has actually a really well-developed inclusion and diversity initiative. For those of you who don't know, TIAA is a financial services firm, and they were actually the first Fortune 100 company with a Black CEO. And they're currently one of only 2 Fortune 500 companies with a Black female CEO. And so when I arrived there, they had already a very mature inclusion, equity, and diversity program. And to see that for the first time, really, in its kind of mature phase, it was great. And it really allowed me to feel more comfortable, I think, as an employee at that organization. And I worked as part of the inclusion, equity, and diversity team there for about 5 years. And since then, in January of 2020, I started at Delta Dental of Colorado. And so I'm the executive lead for our inclusion and diversity work at Delta Dental of Colorado. And I also run the foundation, which has a focus on equity as part of our mission. And so really, it involves not only my work directly with my organization at Delta Dental, but in kind of all my work in the community and just being involved in Colorado.
Thanks, Adeeb.
How did I get, I'm a heterosexual cis white male who grew up in a high school that was 40% Jewish in Western New York. And then we went to Buffalo and spent some time in Jerusalem and in Nepal. When we moved to Evergreen in 2005, my daughter was in first grade at Bergen Meadow. And in the first week, maybe second week of class, she came home in tears. And she was told by a fellow classmate that she didn't belong at that school because she wasn't a Christian. That woke me up to a reality in Evergreen that maybe inspired part of my work, certainly getting more involved in the public schools and trying to get them not to schedule back to school night on Yom Kippur and all the other forms of unintentional but exclusion and marginalization that happen of the Jewish community in a rural community like Evergreen. And in terms of the other aspect of the diversity, inclusion, equity that I've been working on is around fair housing, affordable housing, and the unhoused in the community. And that came about through, in the wake of 2007, 2008, where the number of people who came through ECHO with housing shortage, who were being unhoused, doubled. And I was working with individuals who were unhoused, most of whom had master's degrees. Realized we have a crisis situation here, and the community is not set up to celebrate. You talked about defining diversity as honoring differences. To honor the economic differences that are variable in our community, that was not set up and happening. So both the sort of projection that this is a upper class, white, Christian community, and my kids saying that they got confronted with daily anti-Semitic jokes, daily in the public schools here, and the members of my congregation reporting to me on a regular basis different forms of bias. Those have continued to propel my work in this effort. So I appreciate the support for engaging it.
Thank you, Rabbi Jamie.
Is that better? But when it was off, it served the introvert side of me. And it also causes me to prepare. So forgive me if I refer to notes as we go along. Let's see. I think it's genetic. The question is, how did you get into this work? Genetics. My grandparents and great-grandparents on one side were ex-slaves, or came from the slaves in the South. And another set of grandparents, one was imprisoned in Poland for being an activist and a community organizer, AKA commie, and exiled eventually. And my grandmother was a suffragette. My mother worked for the Black Panthers and was heavy in the civil rights movement. And my father was put in prison when he organized a bunch of black soldiers for equal pay and access to movies, things like that. And we grew up in a house that was very active, always out protesting, and it was part of the world. Much to their chagrin, I grew up and started working for both corporate America and big philanthropy. And as an executive in those worlds and board member, they teased me. They said I was a Republican, which was because, well, working for the corporate world. Right now, I currently work I do executive coaching and organizational development. And in that work, I have found that so many connections, so much of the work of trying to get people to make the culture of their companies better, to develop talent, integrates deeply with equity, inclusion, and belonging. It is inseparable. It is integral. So that's why.
Thank you, Jesse. So a follow-up question to that is if you all could explain the importance of DEI in your work and the advantages of having a DEI plan within an organization versus the disadvantages of not having one.
Should we stick to the same order? Watch my 6th grade organization go, right?
If you'd
All
like
right.
to.
Yep, I have notes too. That's a big question. DEI work is like the foundation of my why. My why I'm on the planet, why I teach, why I experience and choose to interact with people the way that I do. It's about a shared sense of purpose and identity, shared experience, and definitely about community. To bring that down, because that's way up here, in my classroom, it's the foundation. I cultivate belonging and teach community every single day to our 6th graders in this community. We talk about identity and what makes up our identity and how to create a common language so we can understand each other's identity and how to make sense of our identities within a world that doesn't make sense, is turned upside down, and is so full of scary, crazy, fearful, who knows what, that we don't know who we are in those moments. I help my kids understand how their emotions are natural and indicator lights for how they get to experience the world. And that when we walk into a space or meet a person with whom we don't recognize an outer sameness, like an outer connection, we can always look in to find an inner connection. So cultivating belonging is about creating not just safe space in my classroom, but brave space. We look at the wheel of power and we talk about who is marginalized in our society. Again, 6th grade, 11 years old, 12 years old. We talk about what happens if you have more power than less power. What do you do when you interact with someone who, again, may not look like you or have the same profile as you, and you want to ask a question? Like, how do you just go about asking someone a question? What are the right words, and what's the common language to do that? What does intersectionality mean? What does marginalized mean? How do we do oppressed? Like, how does that work, and how does that exist in Evergreen? How do we look out from our window in our classroom in our privilege, because we sit in privilege? How do we recognize that and see out of it as a strength? Because it's a strength that can help connect us out. It can help us move and share and be in Evergreen, but also in the world. So it's my work. It's inside my classroom. It's reached out all the way around to our global classroom. I'm a member of a progressive education board. I do work with a nonprofit called Girl Rising. I work with Take Action Global that does climate action work. We just launched the Goals Project. I'm super connected to the Sustainable Development Goals and the UN's work to create and raise awareness around the goals that we as a world can use to create those conversations with kids and open to change. I connect with as many people as I can to ground in the philosophy that the world truly does become what we teach. And if we do not teach inclusion, if we do not teach diversity, if we do not teach equity, if we do not help our kids understand who they are in this ever-changing world, we're doing all of us a disservice, and our future is nowhere close to where I want it to be. I think so. I don't know how do the questions work? There's an audience question. I would say yes. That was a lot. So should I go on to advantages and disadvantages of not and having, okay.
Yeah.
So Jefferson County Public Schools has a DEI plan. It is, you can access it on the website. There is a whole list of, we are committed to these 10 things. I think it's really important that Jefferson County Public Schools has that. I don't feel a lot of outreach from that at Evergreen Middle School. I attend diversity conferences, like I do my part in my school. I don't feel a proactive presence of that in Evergreen. Although it's invited, I will definitely say that. I invite often. My school, Evergreen Middle School, has a very progressive mission statement. It is out of the box. It's about belonging. It doesn't mention, it may mention diversity, but it doesn't mention, I'm trying to think, it doesn't mention equity. It mentions a worldview and an expanded vision of who we can be in the world. There's an emphasis on global citizenship. There's an emphasis on just possibilities in how we can be our best selves as middle schoolers in a school in Jeffco. In my classroom, as I said, I teach community, and for me, my plan is that language part. So I teach language arts. Purposefully not called English class, because English as a class title is oppressive. I do not only teach the structure of the English language, I teach English language arts, as in a language that we can use to communicate and build bridges with each other around the world, not just English, or not only English, I should say. So in our classroom, our DEI plan is to recognize and honor that each of us shows up as a human being with an individual and unique identity. We all, as we walk in the door, carry our invisible backpacks, and it's up to us to create connections that allow each of us to shine our brightest every day. It's essential in my classroom to have that plan. I'm not sure I answered the question, but okay.
Thank you. We're going in the same order, so Adeeb, how about you go next?
Yeah, sure. I mean, for me, the reason why I decided to take on a career in the nonprofit field was because I actually felt like I came from a place of privilege. So I said earlier, my parents had immigrated from Pakistan. Neither one of them had graduated from high school. Both of them were extremely hard workers who really made a lot of themselves and what opportunities they had. And when I was a child, we would go back to Pakistan every year. And I used to remember thinking if my parents hadn't come to the US, my opportunities would be so much more limited. I would be here in Pakistan. I would be here as a kid, maybe working at 8, 9, 10 years old. And so I always felt a deep sense of gratitude and responsibility because of my privilege, because I had the opportunity to grow up in the United States where I had opportunity, because I had the opportunity potentially to pursue a college education. So with that became, a deep sense of responsibility to give back to communities who didn't have the privileges I had. That's kind of how I always saw it when I was growing up. And so from that, I knew kind of after I graduated, when I was in college, I was pursuing a career in sports writing. And it wasn't much long that I could feel no meaning in that. I had a path to become really successful in that area, but it just didn't really resonate with me. And it's in large part because I knew I had a responsibility to try and do my part to help those who don't have the same opportunities, who didn't win the birth lottery, who don't have the privileges that a lot of us take for granted, to be able to at least put my effort, energy, thought, and expertise into really trying to develop more opportunity for families, for individuals, for kids. And so that's why I pursued a career in the nonprofit sector. And in terms of my current position, I came to Delta Dental in January of 2020, and a big part of me coming to Delta Dental was working for our CEO, Helen Drexler, and she really set a very important role on inclusion, equity, and diversity as part of what she wanted for the company. And we talked a lot about it, and that was part of the reason why I was brought into the company. And so we really started the work when I started, which was January of 2020. Things became really accelerated as a result of the murder of George Floyd. I think as a lot of companies and organizations just kind of saw, and it seems like similar situations happened with the Black Lives Matter protest up in Evergreen. And so we really kind of started really pushing forward, how can we really move the agenda? The work had started before I ever came because the foundation, so there's Delta Dental, the nonprofit insurance provider, and then there's the Delta Dental Colorado Foundation. And the foundation itself has a mission focused on oral health equity. And anytime you use the word equity, it begs the question, what does equity mean? And, I could talk to you probably all night about, defining what equity actually means. But simply put, it means that you understand different people's circumstances. And in the world of philanthropy, if we want to actually help people improve their circumstances, we have to understand their circumstances. We have to employ an empathy lens. And we really have to understand the nature of the issues they're facing in order to co-create solutions within communities to help provide more opportunity for individuals. And so the foundation was undergoing these exercises, and it was pulling in the board members from the company. It was pulling in the staff from the company into those conversations. And that ignited a greater conversation about what does equity mean for the company. And so that was really what sparked a lot of the work on the company. And since that time, we've created an Inclusion and Diversity Council. We've had the opportunity, we have about 25 members, very active, very great group of individuals who are leading this work for the company. I'm really proud to be a part of that. And what's been incredible to see within Delta Dental is how important this work is for all components. So it's part of our mission as a nonprofit organization. Our board of directors holds us accountable, and it's one of their top priorities. Our senior leadership team, we typically make 5 or 6 major objectives that the senior leadership team is focused on annually. One of those for the past 2 years has been on inclusion and diversity. And then our team members hold us accountable, and we hear that feedback on a regular basis because we ask for it and we try to get to it. So we had some outside consultants and expertise come in. We've done an organizational assessment, of where we stand, where we can improve, where our weaknesses are, where our strengths are. Let's understand it, let's improve. And, at the end of the day, we have 1.5 million members of Delta Dental Insurance across the state of Colorado. That is a very diverse group of individuals. And in order to serve our members and be the best company that we can be and fulfill our mission, we have to, it's a necessity to be able to take a different way of understanding our membership, a different understanding of the way we do business, a different understanding of how we, recruit talent and keep talent. Ultimately, one of the good things that has happened from COVID is that there has been this there's a high degree of competition for talent. And a big part of that is that people want to feel like they belong in a place. And so if you can create a sense of belonging, in your organization where all people can come in and be a part of that organization and feel like they can be their whole selves and feel like they can contribute and don't feel like they have to keep their voices down, you're going to be able to retain talent better. So there's so many different reasons and whys of why we pursue this work, not simply from a moral perspective or a historic perspective or a purpose perspective, a mission perspective, a talent perspective. All of these are components as to the why. And to the advantage of actually having it. But the one thing I would caution people on is we shouldn't view inclusion and diversity work as a plan or as a project or as an initiative. We have to focus, or at least maybe even take a step back and think of it as part of our journey, part of our culture. It's embedded in who we are, and it's going to be ongoing from here on until, you know, the foreseeable future. It's not something where we can simply just say we check the box. It'll never be that way. So there's constant growth and learning opportunities with that work. And so you have to be open to that. And you also have to be open to holding yourselves accountable. It's good to have goals. It's good to have plans. You definitely need that work so that you're keeping yourselves accountable to the work that you're promising and that what you're trying to promote, and that you're kind of having those checks and balances on the work itself. But I think it's just envisioning it as part of the organizational culture that constantly needs to be nurtured is something that I think yields to long-term success.
That's good, Dave. Rabbi Jamie?
Yeah, thank you. Oh, wow, this is taking in a lot of information and a lot of personal narrative. I'll try to be brief. I'll talk about the two organizations that I primarily work in, the synagogue here in Evergreen, and then the broader Evergreen community through the affordable housing and the shelter program. If you want to change generations of reinforced cultural bias, you need a plan because there's so much momentum to them that if it's just like in our own behavior. If I want to change, a habit I've been doing for decades, I need a plan to do that. If you don't have a plan, it's not going to actualize. It's not going to materialize. I think to answer that question about the benefit of having a DEI plan, I love the fact that the DEI, the acronym, is actually the Latin word for God, right? Imitatio Dei, like we want to imitate God. In Jewish tradition, so in the synagogue, we have this advantage in terms of this work, a predisposition for this kind of work, in the sense that, Jewish tradition has become an anti-evangelical tradition, right? So there was a short period where it wasn't that way, but for most of the last 3,000 years, prohibits me from trying to proselytize, convert people to Judaism. Why? Because the diversity of thought, culture, and community is a good thing. It benefits the planet. We know that from biodiversity. It benefits your portfolio. You know that from Economics 101. And it benefits humanity and community to have a diverse community. So coming to Beth Evergreen already gets that. The Jewish community generally gets that. So it's natural to honor diversity. And Jewish tradition, inherited a patriarchal structure and a heterosexist bias. And so, creating safe space for people who are non-gender conforming or, who are Jews of color in our community takes more than just putting up a sign in the front of the synagogue saying we are open and affirming, right? Which is the code word for we welcome Jews of gay and lesbian Jews and Jews transgender, transsexual Jews, and Jews of color, and putting a rainbow in the window. And coming up with a plan, requires community engagement and looking at what's out there. And I think that's part of the purpose of this gathering, is to begin the conversation, to listen and learn about what are the ideas out there. So I don't think the synagogue has found the magic bullet. We're still struggling with trying to do that and make sure that, but I still hear from Jews of color who come and say, well, it's hard, I'm the only Jew of color in the synagogue, in the sanctuary, or, the transsexual congregants that we have, talk about it. I think we're doing pretty well with same-sex couples and their families and with their adopted Asian children and them feeling very included, but there's still a long way to go. And I think what I try to do is just to model constantly trying to acknowledge my unconscious bias with the community and invite them to help me do that, because that's an ongoing thing. And I do the same thing, I think, with the shelter program. Keitha Zellner's here, who's works for ECHO and helped get the shelter going with me. And I do training for the volunteers. And the deliberate part of the training is to try to expose our unconscious bias around people who live in their cars or who are unhoused for other reasons. And when we don't acknowledge that unconscious bias, we treat people differently than we would want to be treated. And that's sort of a, to get back to DEI, right? Living in the world with godliness, a sense that every human being is made in the image of God or has inherent dignity. I like the language you use of, the unique spark, right? A sort of gift and talent that every person, every student in the classroom, every member of a community brings, that we would be less than, right? If one of those pieces of the puzzle was missing. And so having a plan to do that in the training of the shelter, and the people I've trained and people I work with, and I still am guilty of using language that is offensive and exclusionary every day. So I don't have a magic bullet, but I think having the conversation, learning from one another, and recognizing that we're works in progress, and that this effort of honoring respecting the differences between us, right, going beyond tolerance to like rehumanization, right? That's the essence of the work, and for me, that's you talked about it's the heart of what you do. It's the baseline. It's for me, I'll call it a religious foundation of why I'm here in the world, and what I do is to learn how to treat myself and others as if they are made in the image of God with inherent dignity. And there's a lot of pressure, and the culture, the dominant culture is, well, let's just put it, that's a countercultural practice. And any time you want to change a culture, whether it's a family culture, a community culture, institutional culture, it takes a plan and it takes daily reinforcement. Daily reinforcement. I'll stop there.
Thank you.
What's the question again?
That's a good question. The question is, explain the importance of DEI within your work. I think you touched on that a little bit in the last question, and what the advantages are of having a DEI plan versus not having one within an organization.
So it's all one question. I separated them into two pieces, so.
That's okay.
Okay, great. Okay. I did talk about the impact. It's interesting when I walk in and some of the boards that I work on, that I work on and with, we have a variety of perspectives at the table, from people who are very progressive and left of center to conservative members who see the world differently from their counterparts across the table. And part of what's important in the work is that they all see the challenge of their changing communities, the changing industry, and that's saying, how do we stay relevant? How do we stay ready for the demographic change that's going to be happening? One of the things that's important in the work is that it was framed recently by Dr. Juanita Mosby Tyler, who does the Equity Project here in Colorado, and she suggests that it's an effort that we work to interrogate our systems and practices and policies with an equity lens. And when you do that, it becomes very clear why equity, inclusion, belonging are critical to a healthy organization, a society, and they help build a vibrant civilization. For all of you, I would suggest reading a wonderful book. I'm kind of a data geek, and this is another data geek. It's an amazing woman. Her name is Heather McGee. She was the CEO of Demos, a research policy organization. She wrote a book called The Sum of Us. I listened to it and read it. Oh my gosh. And it's called The Sum of Us, What Racism Costs Everyone and How We Prosper Together. And she breaks down the detail of how that works. It's an amazing book. And I mean, one way to say is, how does racism affect white people or dominant culture? How does it hurt dominant culture? This book does it for you. Okay, the advantages of having DEI plan versus not having one. Okay, this is where my data geek really comes out. Here are the trends in our states. And this is the number of states that already have a majority people of color. This is the state population. New Mexico, California, Texas, Maryland, Hawaii, already dominant people of color. In another 10 years, Arizona, Georgia, Florida, New Jersey, Alaska, and New York. How does it go? By 2044, not all the states, but the whole country in general, our population, will have a majority people of color. A mere 6 years later, Colorado falls in. And not farther along than that, it's 2056, every single state will have a majority people of color, or BIPOC, indigenous folks. So how do we prepare for this change? Organizations and communities, to me, this is a clear imperative that, at least in the corporate world where I work, in the private sector, it's if we don't move now, if we don't get ready for it and start making the change, when it happens, we'll already be behind the 8 ball, and we'll be, what's the example? We'll be Kmarted or Blockbustered. So we do not want to have that happen, and we don't want to really have that happen for our communities. Do you want to wait? I think this applies to communities and community organizations. Lead the change. Help create the positive culture that will help everyone flourish and be prosperous. I'm on the board of an organization called Colorado Inclusive Economy, where we're bringing together the CEOs from all across the state who are, and we have United Airlines folks, we have the banks, big banks, First Bank, the big hospitals, and they're all saying, how do we change our economy so that everybody prospers? And it's a really exciting leverage point that we're trying to do. But each group, whether it's corporations, foundations, community groups, or schools, we all have a responsibility to say, let's make this a better place.
Thank you, Jack. So I just want to switch gears really quickly, and we'll probably take maybe the next 10 minutes for this question. But based off of all of the information that you all have shared with us, it kind of has given us this this central thread of compassion. It takes compassion to learn through this. It takes compassion to grow through it, and it takes compassion in order to create belonging within your community or within your organization. So can you all just briefly talk about how DEI contributes to compassion within an organization or within a community?
You gotta go first.
I do. You can go first if you want.
Thank you for leading the way.
Yeah. For me, DEI isn't a trend that's we're responding to or preparing for. It's a meeting each other where we are. It's a recognizing, seeing, and hearing each other in a space, whether it's in a 6th grade classroom or in a community center or in the grocery store. It's about truly seeing each other for who we are. That's not just DEI work, that's human, that's people work. When then we show up everyone here did tonight, and we truly see and meet each other, show up and meet each other where we are, open a critical conversation like this, share space, and create a common language to ask questions, to understand each other, to be who we are in a space and help others be their best selves in a space too. That's compassion. It's heart. You show up as you, and you not only allow others to show up as themselves, but you celebrate each person for the unique person they are. And you ask questions, you learn, you're curious, and you co-create a shared experience together. I'll start there.
Thank you. Adeeb?
Yeah, I mean, we could talk about this concept of compassion, I think, with this entire panel and really focus on it in a lot of ways. But I tend to yield back to the idea of equity. And really, what does equity take? It takes a deep understanding, openness, and willingness to want to learn, an opportunity to empathize, and really understand the circumstances that other individuals are coming from. And to me, all of that work is compassion, right? It's an opportunity. Compassion is it's not just an idea that you have a feeling for somebody else. It is, to me, it's a working word. It is something that takes a lot of time, energy, and effort. It takes the ability to study, the history of other people. It takes the opportunity to reach out and listen. It takes, the willingness to really want to look at oneself with a different lens in terms of your own behavior. So that you understand how your behavior affects others. And that's what a lot of this work, inclusion, equity, and diversity, is focused on. But I think, to me, it goes back to that idea of equity. And equity work, to me, is all really about empathy. And it's about understanding others and where they come from and the circumstances that they're in. And until we take the time to do that, it'll be difficult for us to really be compassionate. And so I think it's important for us, at least for me, this is who I am. This is my personality coming out. I'm a big fan of history. I read a ton of history, and that, to me, it's helpful as a way for me to try and understand how we got to where we are today. And I think that exercise is really about an exercise in understanding, openness, learning, empathizing, which to me are all the tributes of what it means to be compassionate. And so, I don't think anyone's ever hurt themselves by being compassionate. And so I think it's something we need to work as a muscle. We need to understand how we develop our skills around compassion. And we need to understand that it takes work and it takes discipline to really honestly be compassionate in the world we are today, where we have systems of oppression, systems that are not compassionate. And those are the things that really need to be change in order for us to be a compassionate society. And that takes a lot of work and discipline.
Thank you.
I want to think about that more before I respond, but I'm going to be conscious of time. I am inclined to lead with respect and compassion as the core values, because I think they can help us avoid the words equity and social justice and Black Lives Matter and diversity have already been tied up into a political and politicized and polarizing in our community. And we have a beautifully diverse, politically diverse community in Evergreen, in Jefferson County. But can't we all agree that respect is a good thing and compassion is a good thing? So we spent a bunch of time talking about respect. The word I want to say about compassion, this is primarily what I teach, is these sort of core character traits, virtues, core values. Compassion is built on two things. The first, what is necessary for compassion, is differentiation. I have to recognize that you are not a projection of me. You are different from me. You have a different life story. You have a different cultural background. Maybe you don't believe diversity is a good thing, right? And I do. And that difference is essential for me to have compassion, because otherwise I'm just projecting my emotions onto you rather than sharing your pain, which is what compassion means, shared suffering. Getting into the pit with you and understanding what it means to be afraid that in 2044 the country's going to be more people of color than white, that a Protestant Christian majority is no longer going to exist, and that changes the face of America, and it scares us, and I want to swear, right? Right here. And I'm going to just bleep, right? As a collective, it scares us. And that fear is generating the reactivity. And if we can't have compassion for that reactivity and the fear behind that reactivity, there's no way of closing the gap that we're all worried about in this community and in the nation. So differentiation. We need to hear each other's stories, right? Listen, learn, and create is the title, right? Listen. And listen with a sense that you know something, you have an experience I cannot know. I can try to know, and it's worth trying to know. Because if I can listen to you with that kind of compassion, we say in Hebrew, you know, Mishi Michubad, who is one who is honored? One who honors all beings. You want to be honored? Honor another person. And show them that respect and step into their shoes. Anyway, so that's the two components. Listening to someone's story, that's an act of love, and differentiating my story from theirs. And that's a act of differentiation. Otherwise, you don't have compassion. But it's an essential starting place for this work.
Thank you. Jeff?
I really honor my colleagues for bringing the philosophical and kind of spiritual aspect to understanding this question. And I deeply, deeply appreciate what all three of you bring to this, because I'm so literal. How does DEI contribute to building a compassionate community? I took the question like mechanically, so that's why I'm moved by what you all three shared.
We love you too. We're
Okay.
we're sharing in contrast.
Right, I'll bring my own weird diversity. Here's the differentiation. There are a lot of studies that show how diversity, literal diversity, improves productivity and creativity in business. I mean, we can list those, and you can find them all over the internet. The real fun ones are that, you know, in 2017, Norwegian Science and Tech University demonstrated that, and to quote, strongly ethno-culturally diverse societies generally have better financial management than more homogeneous societies that are largely dominated by one culture and one people. The more ethnically diverse societies are also generally more democratic. And, get this, there's also great studies that show education outcomes improve. And you mentioned this in numerous occasions about how when you have diverse communities and people, the students are better prepared for the professional and trade worlds, and they can handle the interactions and the demands that are expected of them in the workplace because they're trained by people like you, which is really powerful. The other part, a professor out of Buffalo, New York, the University of Buffalo, explains how communities, yes, there you go, how communities are more democratic when they're diverse. So why is that? Simply put, more diverse communities are the antithesis for gerrymandering. You can't gerrymander around diverse, mixed communities. And compassionate mechanically, something changes when you have more diverse communities. Guess what? Crime goes down. They're less violent. There's less violence for kids under 16. There are fewer homicides, and there are fewer repeat offenders when you have greater communities. Last piece, compassion So I had the privilege of spending a couple of days working with Desmond Tutu and the Truth and Reconciliation Committee in South Africa when I was doing philanthropy work. And he said to us, the thing that causes us to be less compassion is that when we're in pain. And a large portion of that pain can be addressed when there's healing. So what you described, what's going on in your work, what you do in your work, you talk about is, to me, those are healing aspects. And when we heal the communities, it allows us, I believe, to become much more compassionate. So.
Thank you all. I want to open up the floor to audience questions. So,
Keitha, we'll start with you because I know you had one.
Alisha, it was a question for Alisha. Do you get a lot of pushback from the parents? Yes. Oh, the teacher. Oh, no, Julia, sorry, I asked the name and I couldn't remember. Do you get a lot of pushback from the families?
Nope.
Wow, that's fantastic. And
I encourage conversation. I create opportunities to have those conversations in our classroom and create that common language, and then we share tools to bring those conversations home. So kids can have a tool to have that conversation with a parent at home and say, this is what we talked about at school. How do you feel about this? And could we talk about how I feel? Because I'm still trying to figure it out. And can we investigate this together? And that's, I think, one reason why there isn't pushback, because there's always that invitation in. I always want feedback and conversation from all places.
that's great. I thank you for your work, and I wish my kids had been in your class.
Me too.
There was years ago, I don't think Evergreen High School does this anymore, but they used to have a diversity day. And I didn't find it that effective. Of course, I didn't participate, I wasn't there, but from what I heard from the kids, it was like cut day. All the kids didn't show up. And it was, it wasn't incorporated into their day-to-day. It was a special day where they were supposed to participate in something that seemed unimportant, rather than it being part of their everyday, which is what you make it. So I appreciate that.
Thank you for saying.
Does anybody else have some questions? Questions? That was, oh, we have a question.
And I think I'm going to pose this more to everybody in the room, but as Carmen said, we're here from the Mountain Metro Association of Realtors, and we've been kind of tasked with how can we get our passion to bring this into not just our group of people and the community, but how through the Realtors Association, I see to your point, I've seen one of the biggest things in my struggles here is the socioeconomic diversity. And we lack that here, and it's very difficult. I'm surprised to hear you say that you didn't have pushback, but because I've felt pushback. The minute you say we need affordable housing isn't $750,000 townhomes. I mean, that's what they wanted to stop, because that's affordable. That's not affordable housing. And we get pushback on that all of the time, and we're trying to figure out how we can bring the community together to accept that it's a necessity and it's a benefit and it's a wonderful thing if we can all accept it. So I guess that's kind of the conversation I'd like to hear a little bit about.
I know I was just speaking, but I'm going to address that first. As a reference point, we're losing 3 teachers next year because of the housing situation in Evergreen. Our school enrollment is down 200 students because we are not inviting in new community members. Our schools are shriveling because we're not opening as a community. I think your schools are a great starting point. PTAs school communities, I would love to help.
You got it. I mentioned, but after the recession, 2008, we started this affordable housing group. That initiative grew out of the interfaith group, the Evergreen Interfaith Group, so the coalition of sort of progressive clergy, right? There's another clergy group that only white men are allowed to go to, but the progressive groups responded to that. Why? Because the people who taught and took care of our children and take care of our parents or grandparents in the life care center can't afford to live in Evergreen. And that's just unjust. And I don't want to live in a community that doesn't make that possible. So the At Home in Evergreen, that organization, Affordable Transitional Housing Opportunities Mobilizing Evergreen, that's what At Home stands for, still exists, but sort of has been dormant, has been mostly working on the shelter piece because that had became more urgent. There's still advocacy. Most of the advocacy that we recognize needs to be done is at the county level with getting approval for the funding, because county hasn't funded affordable housing in Evergreen since the 70s, I think. So I'm with you on that effort, and I'm grateful to hear from the Realtor Association that support for that project. And you hear, and one of the things that shifted in the last 10 years is that the private sector and the business community has gotten on board and recognizes that they can't hold workers. It's not just the schools and the elder care facilities, it's entry-level workforce. We just had King Soopers, having to do a strike, because our workforce is dependent upon these, and it's a very real issue.
Amanda's going to ask a quick question, and then I'll come back to you.
So you mentioned the experience you had with your daughter in the school. What is your recommendation, and this is a question for all of the panelists, for approaching an institution that very clearly does not have a plan?
You're talking about the whole country, or just
Maybe Alisha could answer that first. How do you approach, right, an organization that doesn't have a plan? How do you make that?
I think it will depend on the purpose of your interaction with that organization. So if it is like your child's school, you want to do some organizing at the parent level, attending school board meetings, going to PTA meetings, and getting a group of people. In most situations, when you're taking on an institution, you want to make sure that you have people power in some sort of way. So that is the ground level, grassroots kind of stuff that you'll want to do in order to create some advocacy around it. If it's a business that you frequent, it's taking your business away and encouraging others to take their business away too, if that's something that's important to you. But it really just depends on how you plan on interacting with that institution. So I hope that's helpful, but it's probably not, depending on what you mean.
May I build on that? I think really what I like about that too is there's a thing about the alignment for what their mission is. And so when I'm approaching organizations that aren't sure or are resistant, is to find out, well, what are your values? What do you care about? What's the mission? And out of that, you will find the wonderful entry points to say, hey, here's why we can move in these directions, that they align with the things that you talk about in your class. They talk that they believe in when they go to their religious institutions, apply to the work and the mission of that entity. Is it a private or a nonprofit? Oh, never mind.
You brought up the question in terms of my daughter's experience. I will say that when we went to the principal of Evergreen Meadow, she was incredibly responsive. I mean, she put all the Jews in the same class in the second grade as her response. because there wasn't an institutional response other than, well, let's not isolate the Jews in different classes because then they're, maybe power in numbers, but, so there were 5 instead of 1 in each class kind of thing. That was her response, but I will say, that my response in, Diversity Day at the high school had support. That was started by, shout out to Tal Arnold, who's connected to the Evergreen Players and the Art Center, is my son. He started Diversity Day as a student council. And Joelle, yeah, when she was vice principal there, or assistant principal, yeah. So my experience is that when you approach folks but again, to lead with respect and compassion rather than necessarily the words, diversity and, equity can sometimes come off as self-righteous. We deserve what you have.
I just wanted to make 2 comments. So Rabbi Jamie had mentioned that I work at ECHO, and I just ran our annual numbers because I do the number crunching there. And we served, we mostly serve a low-income, more of the low-income community in our town and some of the surrounding mountain communities. And in 2020, we served 1,000 households. In 2021, it was a little bit less. It was about 885 households. And that's just counting 1 member of each household. So if you look at the number of children in the household or other adults, it was about 1,400 people we served this past year. That's not a small number of people. And people don't think that we have economic diversity here, but we do. And it's not acknowledged, and it's swept under the rug. And those folks, we need education. We need education that this is existing in our community. We're not trying to build affordable housing for people to move up here, which is fine too, but there's enough people up here already that need it. The other thing I just wanted to say is just education, education, education about the issues. I live in a pretty nice neighborhood, and a neighbor told me recently that she was at a party with other neighbors, and one of the neighbors said, well, if you can't afford to live here, why don't people just move somewhere else that they can afford? The most ignorant statements that people make, and this woman who I was talking to said, well, I said, these are the teachers, and these are the firefighters, and these are the EMT, and these are the grocery store clerks, and the pharmacy people, and everything that happens here is a worker, right? So people need to live. Anyway, it's just talking about it and educating about it. And that was to your question about the housing.
So there is so much to unpack, and this is just the start. One of the biggest reason why we called this Listen, Learn, and Create Change is we have a lot to listen to, and we have a lot to learn, and we have a lot to learn from. So can you guys see me? And so, it was interesting when we put this together. We had a conversation, and we said, what are the outcomes we want to happen? And I think that the biggest thing is to start this conversation so that we can create change. And I love how so many of you have said, this is a journey. And we have had a lot of our own moments here when one of our artists was in a wheelchair and we had her painting on the stage. And she asked Sarah if she could get up on the stage, and we didn't have a ramp. So we are constantly learning. And so what I'm hoping, because I like each of you, I could have listened to each of you guys for like an hour each. I think I have so much to learn from each of you. But what it says to me is where we're going with this is the right direction. And that is, this is a speaker series. So we will break it down from here. The next one actually works with Rabbi Jamie, and he's their executive director. How do you pronounce Luke's last name?
Colacello, Luke
Colacello.
Colacello.
And, you know, he's Sarah and I's new, like, BFF. We love him. And he is going to come and he is going to give a talk on the LGBTQ community and why it's important for us to understand, what does LGBTQ mean? Why is it important to respect the theys and the he's and the she's? And he's going to tell his own story. So I am so excited about that one. That is March 10th that he'll be speaking at. And we have a number of speakers lined up. We're just trying to get their dates on that. And so CEA as an organization, we are doing a lot of learning this year. That's what we're doing. And we want to see you guys in on this journey with us so we can all be a more inclusive community. I want to give a big thank you to, I think I put together a rock star panel here. And it makes me really sad that, you know, the weather happened tonight, because we had 50 people here. We had 50 people signed up, and we had 7. We have 22, they're just not up there. Oh, good for you people, 22, yay! Thank you for joining us on Zoom. So we had 50 people, and you know, and for those people that missed out on tonight, gosh, they missed a lot. And I'm gonna put this on my website because I think that we all have so much to go home and think about how we can be part of the change. So to Alisha. Yes, Bill. We did. Oh, no, yeah. Amanda was monitoring that. To the people on remote, that's Bill Manning, the mayor of Evergreen. We don't really have a mayor, but Bill knows everybody, so we call him the mayor of Evergreen. So, Alisha, thank you. We have so much to learn from you. Alisha actually has a whole sheet of, how do you say it, the proper language. Alisha, you were going to send something to me.
Oh yeah, it's just language and definitions on just DEI language and definitions.
So inclusivity? Great. And everybody, she is about to give birth. So thank you, Alisha. She keeps telling me how tired she is. She doesn't know, does she? She doesn't know. Adeeb, you are amazing, and I wish I could have seen you in person, and hopefully, you know, we'll give lunch. But for people who want to really, Adeeb has such a great story, and he has such great knowledge. So thank you for bringing that to us tonight. And to Jesse, oh goodness, this is my new friend. You know, the other day I was on the phone, I was on the Zoom call, and I thought I said something that I shouldn't have said, and I called Jesse, and he made me feel so good that I didn't say anything wrong. But then when we were done, he just said, Lisa, I want you to go home and relax and not worry about this. And I was like, phew. You know, so I just, like, he's just such a peaceful person. And so I love, you say you're an introvert, and I say you just are this peaceful person, and you attract people with your quietness and your presence. So thank you. And Julia, oh, we love Julia. And thank you so much for coming here tonight. This has been long in the making. So thank you for everything you do for the community. You will continue to be a part of this as we go through this journey together, and a resource for us. And, you know, I got to tell you, as a Jew, I'm not an active Jew. And I was listening to Rabbi Jamie going, maybe I should start going to synagogue. He's pretty good. So I really think that you were definitely inspiring, and I love the work that you do, and you're so beloved in this community. So Thank you for being a part of this. And thank you to all of you guys and the 22 of you. All I can see is part of you on this Zoom. So thank you to everyone. I have a little gift, and Alisha and Adeeb, I'll have to come have lunch with each of you and give you that little gift. But we'll stay in touch. And I will, call it a night for everybody else and give you your gift off camera. But thank you. And please, if you have any ideas that you want to share with us, don't hesitate to call us and email us, because we want to hear from you. So thank you guys. Go ahead, Jamie.
Just for those of you on Zoom who didn't make it tonight and haven't been to the center, I urge you to come and explore the beauty and diversity on the walls. Is a wonderful thing to behold, and I'm sure that contributed greatly in unseen ways to the conversation today. So thank you for the work that the center is doing. Beautiful work.
Thank you. So good night, everyone. Be very careful out there, and put on March 10th on your calendar.